Let's see how far. Let's just read this first paragraph and then we'll call it quits tonight. What is more, I say in this new section, since our understanding of Trinitarian doctrine, we're talking about Orthodox Christians now, since our doctrine comes firstly from the TaNaKH, as it gave rise to the Apostolic Scriptures, right? We take the foundation and we allow God's theology and God's further revelation to be built upon that, and that is the way we should be doing it, right? That's the accurate and safe way to build your biblical theology. Then I say it only makes logical sense that historic Jewish thought should, at times I say, closely resemble some, not all, but some of the main points of Christian thought in regard to matters of ontology, which, what did we say ontology was again? It's this branch of metaphysics that deals with the nature of things, describing the makeup or the origin or the composition or how things are put together, to use air quotes. So when we're talking about God, we're asking the question of how is it that one nature can become two natures, right? How is it that the hypostatic union is possible? How is it that God who's one can express himself as three and yet still be one, right? How can God be God and Jesus be God and the Holy Spirit be God and yet there's only one God? So those are ontological questions and discussions, right? So when we're talking about ontology and pneumatology, we're talking about how can the Holy Spirit fit into the Godhead. Remember, Unitarians and Oneness Pentecostals and Jehovah's Witnesses and Latter-day Saints and Iglesia Ni Cristo, and I'm going to put a little list on the screen. You guys can see it in post-production. In my live class, you can't see it, but right, there's this kind of laundry list that I borrowed from Wikipedia of all these non-Trinitarian groups that are popular these days. And you remember, Rabbinic Judaism, even though they're not on the list, they fall into the same category of non-Trinitarian theological perspectives. So when we're talking about ontology and God and pneumatology, the study of the Holy Spirit, basic Unitarian perspective is that the Holy Spirit is either another name for God himself, right, because God is a spirit, or the Holy Spirit is some impersonal force or active element that God can zap people with, or he can he can send it forth like a delivery boy, but it's still this thing, this tool that's in God's tool bag, but it's not God. And notice I'm saying it's not God. Whereas in Trinity models, we say that no, the Holy Spirit is not an it, he's a person. He's a he. And he is the third person of the Trinity, even though we can't fully explain how that's possible. All right, so I conclude by saying, to be sure, the oft-proclaimed, quote, one God of the Jews, end quote, is, in point of fact, we need to remind ourselves, the very same exclusive, quote, one God of the Christians, end quote, right? So if we at least give credit where credit's due, as I'm drawing this part of my study to a close, even though we as Protestant Christians and Orthodox Christians and Catholic Christians and all these other non-rabbinic Christians, even though we as Christians are going to have our sharp disagreements with Rabbinic Judaism, in the end, we have to at least acknowledge the fact that the God that they claim to serve is the very God that we claim to serve. Now, whether or not we really truly are serving the same God, or Rabbinic Judaism is serving a God of their own making, right? A God of their own idolatry. Well, that remains to be seen, and we could have discussions along those lines. But on paper, or in spoken form, or in general practice, they speak of God using the same scriptures that we use, and thus the conversation is actually geared towards us understanding, if from a third-party perspective, that it's the same God that we're having this discussion about. It's just a difference of agreement on his makeup, his definitions, his rules, his functions, etc., etc. That's in contradistinction to, say, the Islamic God or the Muslim God, Allah. The God that they describe is not the same God that we Christians or even we Jews describe, right? They may say, well, it is the same God, it's just a different name. But if you read through their Islamic scriptures and their prophets' writings and the Quran and all of their other holy books and such, you'll begin to realize that the God that they describe is not the same God. So that's what I mean by the one God of the Jews is, in point of fact, the very same exclusive one God of the Christians. And that'll do it for exploring the Shema discussions on the issues of Trinity.